Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my booktube channel. So today I'm going to be doing my June wrap up. I know that there are still a couple more days left in the month of June, and I also know that I'm not going to be able to finish any of the books that I'm currently reading by the time the end of June rolls around. So I thought I would go ahead and just do my June wrap up for you guys today. So June was a very YA heavy month for me. And I think it's because June in general was a heavy month for me personally, and young adult just has a tendency to whisk me away to these different worlds, and I can really immerse myself in the books because the content in young adult literature is usually not as heavy as adult literature. So that is why I think the majority of the books I read this month were YA fantasy or dystopian. So in the month of June, I read a total of 8 books and DNF'd 1. So let's just go ahead and get on into the books. So the first 3 books that I read were a series, and that is the Shatter Me series by Tahara Mafi. It includes Shatter Me Book 1, Unravel Me Book 2, and Ignite Me Book 3. So I actually read these in, I think, a week's time span, and it follows our protagonist Juliet, who is locked away in an asylum because her touch is lethal. And as the plot unravels, we find out that she is part of a small population that has superpowers, kind of like X-Men powers. And this entire series, these people with these powers are fighting against the reestablishment, which has come in and taken over the government, and they are oppressing the people and kind of taking away any sense of individuality. And this series for me was very character driven and very romance heavy. So if you're looking for a dystopian young adult series that is very developed world wise, then I would not recommend this. But if you are looking for a series that really focuses on good character development, I would suggest this. And if you like romance too, I thought the romance in this book, the series was really well done. And I was really into it, which is kind of hard to get me into a romantic subplot. So I thought it was very well done. I will say Tahara Mafi's writing style is definitely unique. It took me a little while to get into. I think that her writing style improved from book 1 to book 3. Writes profusely in metaphors, like entire paragraphs of metaphors that are completely unnecessary. So it took me a while to get used to that writing, and trust me, like, you could probably skip over a couple paragraphs of metaphors and still understand what's going on. But her writing did get better from the first book to the last book, and those horrific amount of metaphors did decrease just a little bit. But I actually really liked this series. I really liked the characters. I really liked how Juliet came into herself. I really liked how her relationship with Alex and Warren developed, and I just really enjoyed it. I wouldn't suggest it as like high class literature, but if you're looking for something that's entertaining and a story to get just lost in, then I would suggest this. And overall, as a series, I gave Shatter Me 4 stars, 4 to 5 stars. Alright guys, so the next book I read, and these are not in any order, well these are, because I know these were the first ones I read, but after that I can't remember what I read, so I'm just going to get through everything else I read in June. So the next book that I'm going to show you that I read in June was King's Cage by Victoria Aveyard. This is the 3rd book in the Red Queen series. I was very apprehensive going into this because I did not enjoy the 2nd book in the series, Glass Sword, and honestly, I hardly remember anything that happened in that book, and it must not have really mattered that much because I was able to completely follow along this plot. So you could probably skip the 2nd book and still understand what's going on in this book if you read the 1st one. It's just saying something. But I actually really liked this book. I gave it 4 to 5 stars. It is a young adult fantasy. The politicalness of this book was really developed in the story, which I really enjoy. Political intrigue in books, especially fantasy. I would have liked to see more from Maven and Mare's relationship. They were together quite a bit, and just because of their history from the Red Queen, I kind of would have liked to see maybe a little bit more compassion or empathy for Maven on Mare's part. One of the negatives I can say about this book is every time Mare and Maven interact, Mare is thinking like, I should kill him, or I could strangle him, or she's always devising a way to kill him. Like, we get it, you hate this guy, but you don't need to remind us every time you see him that you want to like knife his guts out. So, but overall, I thought that this book was really well done. It kept me interested from beginning to end, and it is quite a thick book. So I was able to get through it pretty easily. It did take me a little while to read because it's so thick, but I really enjoyed the political intrigue. I really enjoyed how Mayor grew. She wasn't nearly as obnoxious as she was in Glass Sword, and I think it was a good third installment, and it set up the fourth book, War Storm, really, really well, and I'm actually excited to read the fourth and final book in this series because of King's Cage. The next book that I read in June is Lifeblood by Gina, I think it's Showalter by Gina Showalter. This is the second book in the, I think it's the First Life series. I know that the first book was called First Life. So this is a YA, and I really struggle with trying to figure out what to call this book because it's not traditional fantasy. I was going to call it like an alternative reality, because Earth still exists in this book, but there are two other realms besides Earth that take place in the afterlife, or the second life of each person on Earth. After they die, they get to choose a realm they want to go to. So it's kind of like an alternate reality. It's not really fantasy, but I could see why people would call it fantasy. I'm just going to refer to it as alternate reality because when I think of fantasy, I think of like magic and different creatures and stuff like that, and that is not in this. So this is the second book in the series, and here we are following Ten as she has chosen the realm that she wants to serve in the afterlife. And there's really not a lot I can say about this if you haven't read the first book. I will say that I was very unsure if I was going to read the sequel because I did not enjoy First Life very much. I do have a review for that on Goodreads if you want to read why, but I was lucky enough to receive a copy of the sequel in a giveaway, so that's why I read it. And I will say that this book was infinitely better than the first book. However, I'm not sure that I enjoyed it enough to continue on. There is a third part to the series. I don't know if it's the last book in the series. I'm assuming it's a trilogy. And I'm really not sure if I'm going to read it or not. I found that I couldn't really connect with what was going on in this story. The author was throwing just tons of plot lines in there, and to the point where I couldn't focus because there was just so much going on, and plot lines that would seem interesting and relevant were never expanded upon. So it's like, why did you add that in the first place? The love interest, Killian, and our main character, Ten's relationship, I didn't like from the beginning. I didn't understand it, and that is a huge, huge focus of this book and the next one. So if I'm not into that love interest, then I'm really not going to care about reading it. So I will let you guys know if I decide to pick up the next book in the series, which is out, and I don't know the name. But I gave Lifeblood 3 out of 5 stars because overall it was an entertaining read. I didn't feel like a chore. I was able to sit down and read it and enjoy it. First Life, however, did feel like a chore. Thought about DNFing it a couple times. The only reason that I continued reading it is because I saw that a lot of people said this book was better than the first one, which is true. But I will let you know if I continue on with this series or not. Alright, the next book that I read was my DNF book, and this is like sacrilegious for DNFing this book, but I read or tried to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. This book is about 220 pages. I got 100 pages in and DNF'd at about 45%. So here's why I DNF'd this book. Mark Twain is known for his characters speaking in their vernacular. And in this book, we have Jim, who is a runaway slave, and trying to read his dialogue, I felt like I was reading another language. And I had to sit there and try and figure out what he was saying, and it was a chore. It was not enjoyable. I didn't want to have to sit there and try and decipher what one of the main characters was saying. I felt like Twain could have said, you know, what Jim needed to say and then described it in his accent or in his native speech or in his vernacular. Like, we're smart readers, we can understand that he has an accent and he speaks differently because of his background and he's uneducated. You don't have to specifically write that, you know, dialogue word for word. So that is the main reason that I DNF'd this book. So I am familiar with the story. I know how it ends. You know, this is a very staple read in American literature. I will say that I think this book really encapsulates the South during this time period. So I think it should remain an American classic. However, I found it very laborious to read. And considering that I already know how the story ends, I just didn't feel the need to continue reading it. I do have a copy of The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain, and I'm kind of apprehensive to read that now. So if any of you have read The Prince and the Pauper, tell me how it is, and if I can like look past how he uses vernacular, because I think in that book he uses like the old English vernacular. So I'm just hoping that it's not like where I have to sit there and figure out what they're trying to say. So if any of you have read The Prince and the Pauper, let me know if it's like that and if you've enjoyed it and if you think I should read it. I think I found it at a used bookstore for like 50 cents. So anyways, this is my DNF and my classic read for the month because I always try and read one classic every month. Alright guys, so the next book that I read for the month of June was Cress, which is book 3 of the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I really, really liked this book. It was so much fun. And the Lunar Chronicles was a series that I really wasn't sure I was going to continue. I read Cinder, the first book, and I read Scarlet, the second book, and I think I gave both of them 3 out of 5 stars. And I wasn't sure I was going to continue the series because I just didn't feel that connected to any of it. But I found Cress in a used bookstore for really cheap, so I just picked it up. And it's like night and day. So if you're not familiar with the Lunar Chronicles, each book follows like a traditional fairy tale character and does like a science fiction spin on it. And in this case, Cress is Rapunzel, who instead of in a tower by herself is in a satellite orbiting Earth by herself. So I really enjoyed this book because the plot really thickened. All of the characters that we've come to know and love in the first 2 books, we have Cinder and Kai, and Wolf and Scarlet were present, and Thorn, whose Thorn is a hoot. He was great in this book. Cress I thought was absolutely adorable. I really, really enjoyed reading from her perspective. That was my favorite part of the story. So I really thought that Marissa Meyer did a great job in this book, and now I want to read the ending. I have Winter, so I'm really excited to read the final book in this series, all because of Cress, because the other 2 books I was kind of like, I wasn't sure I was going to like this, but I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Alright, and the next book that I read was The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the first book of Maggie Stiefvater's that I read, and holy cow, I fell in love with this series and these characters. I can't even tell you how fun it was to read this series. So if you're not familiar with The Raven Boys, this is a YA paranormal. I thought it was more fantasy, which is why I picked it up. It's definitely more paranormal. It follows several characters, 4 boys, Gansey, Adam, Noah, and Ronan, who are students at this elite private school. And then it also follows Blue, who is the daughter of the town psychic, who is very, very, very gifted, and all of her family, her female cousins and aunts live with them, and they run this psychic business in this town in Virginia. And Gansey, one of the private school boys, is trying to work out kind of paranormal activity going on in the city with regards to old Welsh mythology and ley lines and spirits and ghosts, and it is just so much fun. I can honestly say this is a very character-driven book. The plot develops super, super, super slow, but I had read that about this series, so I knew what I was getting into. But even still, I found myself just so engrossed in this plot with these characters' lives that I immediately went and purchased the next 3 books in the series. And I'm currently reading The Dream Thieves, which is the second book in the series. So I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. So I'm so excited to finish this series. I highly recommend it. But like I said, the plot is very slow. The paranormal aspect is definitely not the highlight. It's more about the character development and how the characters interact with each other and how they deal with personal issues, if they are or are not related to the paranormal aspect, because some of them are, some of them aren't. So it's a really good book portraying relationships, in my opinion, in a realistic manner, which is really, I think, hard to find in YA, paranormal, or fantasy. So that is it for my June wrap up. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you think about them, and I will see you next time. Bye.